Hello, welcome to the Meeting 10, an ongoing series based on the work of Stan Tenen. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our usual cast of characters: Michael Andron, Daniel Gill, Adele Packer, and Lavana Tenen. So if you've been following this program, you've seen that our last, I think, 4 episodes were based on video clips of Stan's earlier presentations that we have on our website, extremekabbalah.com. The name Extreme Kabbalah was Stan's idea. I had done the clips, and he came up with the name. I was kind of surprised because he didn't often refer to his work as Kabbalah. But as we're going to discover today, is the relationship to Kabbalah is solid and probably essential in understanding his work and understanding Kabbalah. Most people today have heard of Kabbalah. It became popular in the latter half of the 20th century, the 60s, 70s, kind of went through a pop culture phenomenon in the 80s, 90s, people like Madonna and other celebrities. And a lot of that was focused on the meditative aspects, the tree of life, a lot of those ideas. But as we're going to see, there's much more to it, and that the essential part of Kabbalah is tied into what Stan's work is based on. There are several books of Kabbalah. We're going to concentrate on 3 to a certain extent: the Bahir, the Zohar, and Sefer Yetzirah, and its relationship, or Stan's relationship, to those books. So as we're going to see, that Stan spent most of the time in relation to Kabbalah on the Sefer Yetzirah, and some on the Zohar, very little on the Bahir. But I did want to play this clip. This is from a very early recording that I did in 1987, not long after I had met Stan and I was starting my video business. We recorded this in his studio in Lavana's and Stan's house in San Anselmo. And here he cites a passage from Bahir, but it's the statement that he makes after that that I think is significant. So let's watch this.
I'm going to read a couple of quotations, and they're a little lengthy, and then I'm going to try to show the interpretation and walk through them, and maybe we'll get to some other quotations at the same time. The first is a little section from the Bahir in R.A. Kaplan's translation, and it shows up in Sefer Yetzirah as well, or at least related things, and I'm going to read the Sefer Yetzirah second. This is on page 34 of Kaplan's book, the Bahir, paragraph 95. The Blessed Holy One has a single tree, and it has 12 diagonal boundaries: the northeast boundary, the southeast boundary, the upper east boundary, the lower east boundary. However they're described, there's a permutation set of 12 directions, boundaries. And then it says, they continually spread forever and ever. They are the arms of the world, quote unquote. On the inside of them is the tree. Paralleling these diagonals are the 12 functionaries. Inside the sphere, there are also 12 functionaries. Now, I could go on, and there are many, many more geometric qualities that are listed, but that little central section is the heart of the matter. Literally the heart of the matter. Geometrically, when you look at it in cross-section, it looks like a heart. And in fact, it's referred to as a heart in some of the allegorical descriptions that are being taken to be stories when they're really descriptions of geometry. This is our thesis. Another thing that you can spot A heart has an alternate look to it. That same shape is the shape of an apple. And so in some traditional sources, we're looking at an apple, a field of apple trees. The Greek and the Christian traditions speak of apples, and Hebrew as well. Okay, the idea is to identify what is this single tree, what are these boundaries, what does it mean to say they continually spread forever and ever, why would they be called the arms of the world, and what does it mean to say inside of them is the tree, and paralleling these diagonals are 12 functionaries, and inside the sphere there are also 12 functionaries. What's a functionary? It's my conjecture that these words are bad translation. Just like Kaplan has reinvigorated some of the meditative terms by identifying words that had simpler meanings as having deeper meditative meanings, I believe these words, tree, functionaries, sphere, boundaries, are words that our translators have put in because they don't have the geometric image they represent in front of them. What's a functionary to a geometer? What's a diagonal boundary to a mathematician? You have to pull from what's around you, the language you use, to describe what you're looking at. And so this is the best description that could be made when this was written up.
First off, I haven't seen that video in I don't know how long, decades. And it was a really good choice because it does show that the way that he was thinking about the materials that he was looking at from the very beginning. And that was his approach, period, throughout all of his work. One of the things that you mentioned, which is true, that in this discussion here, academicians will object to our calling all of these things Kabbalah, but nonetheless, this was the popular framework at the time, and it is what most people know. The idea of looking for geometries, numerical relationships, anything that could be viewed, even in translation, as a description of locations, directions, numbers, number sequences. That was what attracted his attention, because in a sense it was parsable. It was that P-A-R-S-I-B-L-E. It could be parsed. He thought in that way. He had already, by the time this video was made, come up with the idea of the autocorrelation of the letters of the first verse of Bereshit, and that was one of the first things he did, and that autocorrelation could be portrayed with geometric qualities. And then at that point, he started to see descriptions that corresponded with the geometries that he was seeing, outlined, if you looked at them in the right way, outlined in various texts, which were popularly referred to as Kabbalah. A lot of his early work was focused on Sefer Yetzirah, which is, of the three books that you mentioned, that's the one that's traditionally the earliest. In part because the others were less geometrically expressed. Sefer Yetzirah, it focuses on, first of all, it focuses on the letters as individual entities, not necessarily just as, that their purpose is not just to make words that you can read, that each letter has its own essence, and that there's a numerical quality to it. And all of these things really were kind of geared to the way he thinks. So that was his entry into all of this material. very early on, actually. I've got all kinds of little itty bitty books on or translations of Sefer Yetzirah from, the age of the 70s and 80s and so on. Just like he's got a whole section of them that he was looking at early on. He eventually came to the translation by R.E.A. Kaplan as basically his Bible for Sefer Yetzirah, from which he branched in several different directions. And Bill, since you probably have other things to say about Sefer Yetzirah,
yeah, we will. Yeah, right. We're going to come back to Sefer Yetzirah. But first I want to talk a little bit about Zohar. But before we do that, does anybody have any general comments about Kabbalah that relate to what we're talking about, that we can enter, or we can go specifically to the books that we're going to discuss, mainly Zohar and Sefer Yetzirah? Yeah, Michael.
It's kind of a sad irony that to a Makubal, a Kabbalist, the most important thing was not what was ever written down, because every single one of them, they say that every Kabbalist is supposed to preface whatever he's going to be saying, he has to first say, this is my understanding of it, because we're dealing with something that's beyond simple cognition. And of course, once we set it in words, it loses a certain flexibility to it. But everybody has a different place where they're standing, where they're looking at something. And that changes it. I mean, the five blind men and the elephant kind of thing. Everybody's seeing what they're seeing. But there were three big ideas, and this is an R.E.A. Kaplan analysis as well, which is that there's the Maaseh Breshit, the act of creation. In other words, what is the world? What is it? What are the dimensionalities? How do we somehow climb a ladder to get to God? How did he create the world? What's it all about? Where are we? The second part is the Merkava part, which is the chariot, or how you get connected to that. So if that were the internet, or internet, I guess, if that's the internet, then our computer, as to how we get onto that internet, is the Merkava part, which is traditionally modeled after Ezekiel's first chapter, because at the end of the first chapter, he said, and God spoke to me and said, oh, son of man. And that was really the first prophecy. The whole first chapter, and Kaplan goes in several books, he goes through this exposition. The whole first chapter, which sounds like a close encounter of the third kind, or higher, is the method of how to get into that state of mind, how to be a prophet. A prophet doesn't just walk along, God says, hey, I'm going to talk to you. They worked at it. They meditated on it. And so that was, from our side, that's what we do. From God's side, that's what God did. And then there is the least favorite, but the favorite of the masses, which is what they call practical Kabbalah, which is write me an amulet that has a magic thing so I can find my loved one, so I can get a healing, whatever thing that was. Because in almost every wisdom tradition in the world, there were the guys who, the high priests or the lamas or the shamans or whoever they were. And then there were the regular people who didn't get into all of that. So, yes, and Stan, as short a time as I knew him, was a Kabbalist. He was interested in how the world was structured and how we connected to it. And he chose his way because that's the way he was wired. The first tapes I saw of him, several of them, he introduced by saying, and the book as well, I have an ability to see patterns. That's what he could do. He saw stuff, he'd look at something and he would see stuff that the rest of us didn't see. And you could, and that was the problem in talking to some of the rabbis, because he would show what he's doing, and he had the advantage that he could show it. He could draw a picture. He could show us a piece of art, a design, a model, something. And that's not the way they think. They're not standing there. So, and the last thing that I wanted to say as just an introduction to this whole world is that they say that the prophets, with Moses as an exception, that the prophets of the Hebrew Bible were standing in the second world. There are 4 worlds that are the ladders, steps that we climb to really get logged on deeply. But the prophet himself was not standing in the 4th world. He hadn't climbed to the top of the ladder. The source for that is Ezekiel. He said, I was standing, and this is what I saw. And then on top of that, there was a throne. And on top of that, there was God, or a man, or a figure of a man, or each of the words used in Hebrew indicate a distance from where the guy is standing, where the prophet is standing. So there's a lot left to wonder and awe and mystery. And I don't know of anybody as doggedly trying to turn that mystery into physicality like Stan did, right down to the letters themselves, right down to the letters. Look at this structure. What does this structure remind you of? What does this guy say about that letter? What does this one say? And what lessons can we learn? The goal, however, for everybody was understanding the mystery, logging on to the internet and getting to that point. And whatever way they did it was technically Kabbalah, which is why you have what's called Christian Kabbalah. If you show some of that stuff to a rabbi Kabbalist, he's going to say, this is just, this is nonsense. Okay, they don't know what they're talking about because they don't even understand Hebrew, and they're, but it's a way of logging on to the internet. And if we start from that perspective, then we can understand, okay, there are a lot of ways to get to the top of the mountain, some faster, some slower, some roundabout. This was Stan's way of logging on. So he would go down to the basement, as Levon always says, and then he'd come up with this big grin on his face. I got it. Of course, 6 months later, he might have gotten something else that undid what he said 6 months ago. But it's a step-by-step process. And I think that's, I'm just offering that for those who are listening to this, who have no background in this, who are coming from the science side or the sacred geometry side or whatever. We're all trying to understand and somehow utilize it, not just be scholars of it, but somehow fix the world because the world's a mess.
Right.
And it's easy to become pessimistic.
Right. And that's right. That's the underlying goal, is to make use of it, not just to study it and meditate on a personal level. Daniel, did you have something to say about this?
Yeah, I think it's if you look at the failure of societies and religions and over the ages, you look at rubble and you look at mosaics and the whole field of archaeology and anthropology and how things develop and then fall and then develop and whatever. Judaism's been around for quite a long time, and Sefer Yetzirah is I think it's the oldest document we have. It's really, really old. And the interesting part about the vision of a society of Judaism and the concept of God is the secret of it is really in the vision of Ezekiel, where he's having this amazing vision, this incredible things happening, and he looks like, of course, intelligently looks to see God. And what does he see but a person? And so to me, this is Judaism's like ultimate innovation. Like, there are all sorts of ways of looking at God, but the first place you should look is inside yourself, inside your own humanity, and inside your particular process of being a human being. And that's the vision of God. You know what I mean? it's God in the Jewish tradition or Hebrew tradition does do miracles, but it's, you know, after the big ones, it's not much, you know, like it's really, I mean, you got the Red Sea and you got the 10 plagues and, you know, and you have little kind of things interfering here and there, but really the real miracles come with the vision of Esther and Mordecai, come through human innovation and human endeavor. So they really, you know, they're you know, Purim and Esther is really about God within the human being and not outside. And it's particularly heartening. I mean, it's such a beautiful vision. So that's, you know, you asked the chariot you spoke about is really nicely, you know, it's like when you start doing your thing, first you have to discover your thing, you know, whatever you have to define, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And it's usually what you're super attracted to. You know, it's that, again, that's the other lesson. It's not like do as you're told. And then, you know, it's like, no, do what you want. and in that process, you'll become a better person. Find out what you like, find out what you want first. Okay. I like music. Okay, fine. Great. Good. I like geometry. Wonderful. I like mathematics. I like reading books. Okay, great. Find your thing. And then once you get deep into it, like, you know, I mean, I just finished writing this piece and like, a commission, very exciting thing. And I mean, it just flew out of my fingers. I mean, it's a lot of work just to sit there and think about stuff. But the concept of anyone who's done work in the world knows it's like the concept of the Merkava is not just a intellectual concept. You know, there's a higher, you're connected to this higher some things, and it speaks through you, but with you. It's not just like you're an empty vessel and you have nothing. You know, you have quite a bit to do with it actually, but it's not entirely you either. It's not like an you know, either or. It's both. So, and then just one more thing you mentioned also, very very nice astute comments about practical Kabbalah. It was expected in Eastern Europe that if you were a rabbi worth anything, you better know how to summon angels and get demons away and pronounce names of God that could literally make miracles. It wasn't like you know, on the job resume. Can you imagine you walk into, you're a rabbi interviewing and you walk in and you're like, oh yeah, but I can do miracles. They'd be like, whoa, you know, like, so, but at the time it was, and the Baal Shem Tov actually was the last person who really did that. It was from him on, it's really, I think Rabbi
Nachman also had some of those skills.
Yeah, I think you're right, but it was starting already to, you're for sure, you're 100% right. I think it was starting to be hidden more. You know, there were still a lot of people who could do that, including Rabbi Nachman for sure, but it wasn't like societally. You know, we had the dawn of the Enlightenment and modern technology and everything, so it kind of, that stuff faded.
Yeah, and actually, for those of you who are watching who are going, really? I, a couple of years ago, got this really huge book on the history of Hasidism, and I was utterly done from a totally scholarly point of view. Basically, they were going back to the original, whatever original documents and so on were left from the era of, you know, the late 1600s, early 1700s. Just community records and records of what was happening, you know, in the world at that time in that particular location. And it became really clear to me that, yeah, you know, these very objective records from the time, you know, not tales of your Rebbe that you loved, but just, you know, from tax records or records of birth and death or whatever, there really was something very, very, what we would call really weird.
Yeah, Einstein called it spooky
at the time, and it really
very
was
spooky.
It was a real thing.
Yeah.
So, for those of you who think that was all just flim flam, I check some of the scholarly records. There was something going on that we now really can't understand, but that was very real and physical and happening, just as Daniel was referring to.
And most likely that was related to Kabbalah, probably more of the alphabet, the letters, and the permutations of the arrangement of the letters, and that sort of thing. Adele, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I was introduced to Kabbalah through Stan's work. So I kind of came at it by looking at some of the beautiful geometric shapes that was the tree of life, just with dots on a page, and how he moved those dots around. And I just saw interest in the geometry of it translated into movement. And then I started researching what the heck I was doing and realized how deep and beautiful and well researched his work is. And I started, like, I think I've mentioned this before, like, I saw that he was reading Isaiah Horowitz, The Generation of Adam. So I just jotted that down. I said, oh, I should pick up that book. Well, just try reading it. You have to read it 100 times, just to start to get a sense of the mystical kind of opening of language to meaning. And there's so much in it about the letters, and beautiful, pulling apart the essential letters of God's name and looking at not just Yud, but Yud spelled Yud, Vav, Dalet, and how those three letters inform us about just the very first letter of this essential 4 letters of God's name. So it had so much depth and so much spiraling in. So I have since taken courses and read books, and I'm in no way as well versed as Michael appears to be on Kabbalah or Daniel, but I feel it. Like, I really resonate with how the letters are pathways to God. And so what's the pathway? One pathway might be as simple as just moving beyond your limitations. And where does that take you? Or one might be just, what's it like to open a door and stand on a threshold and take a chance and move forward. So they're messages about living well, and connecting to something bigger than yourself. So that's where I came at it, was, from making some crazy decision to make a very long dance about the letters, and to use the gestural language. And the doors just kept opening. Dalet was just the beginning to open that door. And so I think sometimes people look at Stan's work and they think it's very intellectual, but for me, it opened up all the big questions were opened up through his work. So I think his book is well worth tackling, and looking at his index of other resources just is an ongoing learning now. It's my life learning.
Can you hold up that book? So I can.
This one?
Yeah. Well, you referred to it. No, the one.
Isaiah Horowitz.
Yeah, Isaiah Horowitz, The Generation.
Okay.
The Generations of Adam.
Okay.
Yeah. It's really Zohar. It's Zohar kind of translated and moved around.
Okay. All right. Fortunate is the person who is introduced to Kabbalah through Stan's work.
Indeed.
Okay. Coming in from that pure,
Just from curiosity.
Right.
Yeah.
Curiosity was always his motivation, and he really knew nothing. He was starting from, basically, he recognized the letters of the alphabet, and that's it. And that's really the truth. So I know that as we go on to talk about the Zohar a bit, but I actually prepared for this video by going through all of the references in the book. That's why I have, things to say. But
so did I.
he came across certain ideas which are expressed in the Zohar, from really little popular renditions or, quotes from by other scholars who were, talking about various ideas which were important to him when he recognized them. Without realizing that, and then later, when he started talking to people, rabbis, people who actually had a background in, traditional material, and he would mention a particular idea, such as the stories being garments, but what's more important than the garments is the body.
I want to read that quote.
Yeah.
I want to read
Okay.
that quote.
But that particular thing, and then, the rabbi or whoever would already say, oh yeah, that's the Zohar. The idea that these ideas within traditional people who knew the traditional material were just, oh yeah, okay, was really a surprise to him. He was delighted, but that it what I'm trying to say is that basically he came to this whole thing with fresh eyes,
Right.
and a particular set of talents, and used them as honestly as he knew how.
And you're right about lack of knowledge for a lot of this stuff. On that same tape that I played before, there was a part later where he's talking about Moses and the four-letter name of God, I shall be that I shall be. And he says, hey, Bill, was that Genesis or Exodus? I think it's pretty sure it's Exodus. So, it was just so pure. It was so great. So let's talk about Zohar, because I think Zohar is probably the most studied book of Kabbalah. I think because it's more of a narrative, and that's why so many people have written books about it and tried to explain it in non-geometric ways, obviously. But this was a quote that Levana alluded to that Stan used on several of his introductory tapes. If you watch Geometric Metaphors of Life, he opens with this quote. So this is from the Zohar, and it's from a rabbi, and it starts, woe unto the man who asserts that this Torah intends to relate only commonplace things in secular narratives. For if this were so, then in the present times, likewise, a Torah might be written with more attractive narratives. Now, the narratives of the Torah are its garments. He who thinks that these garments are the Torah itself deserves to perish and have no share in the world to come. Woe unto the fools who look no further when they see an elegant robe. More valuable than the garment is the body which carries it, and more valuable even then, that is the soul which animates the body. Fools see only the garments of the Torah. The more intelligent see the body. The wise see the soul, its proper being, and in the messianic time, the upper soul of the Torah will stand revealed. Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, that should have been like the introduction to every Hebrew school class or any study of Torah, because I feel like it's totally been forgotten. And I like the way that he's saying that in such strong terms. Woe, and the fool who just sees, and what he's talking about are the stories that everybody dwells on. That this is it, this is the truth, this is the Torah. Well, no wonder people are alienated from Judaism and the Torah. I mean, I was when I heard this, and every time I opened the text, and it was this begat that, and this war, and this blood, and this killing, and all this. I said, ridiculous. This is the basis for a faith. So this is what Stan believed also, but he was looking even deeper than this rabbi, because he was looking at it from the mathematical perspective. So the Zohar, there are places in the book where he is finding the geometry. that it's mentioned, and he's translating that in those terms. Yes, Lavana.
Okay, there's a bit of history to that. In terms of the progression of this work, and where he was focused and when. In the beginning, although when he was basically surveying everything he could find, yes, that particular book, which was written by a rabbi who was a scholar, who quoted this particular idea from Zohar, that was very attractive. And there were other ideas as interpreted by this or that scholar who was writing about the Zohar, that Stanley found attractive and to the point. He found that, at least early on, for him, Sefer Yetzirah was, because it was focused on the letters and on the numbers and is really unembellished, it is what it is, that was an easier place for him to start exploring. And in fact, if one looks at various translations or attempts at translating the Zohar, I'll put it that way, it's very difficult to follow. Finally, there are some geometric references that he did find, that basically the numerical, some of them describe certain figures. But one of them that really grabbed him wasn't until the most recent scholarly translation of the Zohar was published, which is that one done by Daniel Matt. And there was a description, a translation of a commentary from, on the second verse of the Torah, which is, when the earth was, it's basically the talking about null and void and so on. And the phrase was, where is it? There, yeah, okay. Now, we've had all kinds of people ask us, well, what about the torus? What about this particular form? What about the smoke ring? How does creation start? And so here is from our book. From Dan Matt's translation, here's the beginning, the section of the Zohar that explicitly comments on the beginning of Genesis. And the translation reads, a spark of impenetrable darkness flashed within the concealed of the concealed from the head of infinity, a cluster of vapor forming in formlessness thrust in a ring. Think about it. That's when, in his early talks, Stanley started talking about, what's the first thing that you can do? What in a formless void, the first thing you can do is create vorticular motion. And somehow Matt captured in this translation an exact description of a cluster of vapor forming in formlessness thrust in a ring. And it turns out, in one of his notes for this, one of the two words for cluster of vapor forming in formlessness, the word kutra, means both knot and smoke. That just totally floored him when he read that footnote. That was another one of those moments. So at that point, that and the cube octahedral structure, which I'm not going to go into now, were his two really most explicit findings that he could express that related to the Zohar. The Zohar was always more difficult for him simply because it's not structured really. It's formed in terms of tales. People tend to translate it as poetry. People tend to translate it sometimes as really weird stuff that doesn't make any sense if you know about, some of the geometrical forms on it. I know that Daniel, you and Stanley and I had a couple of whole sessions around our dining room table going, oh my God, did he really translate this that way? No.
Yeah.
So that was much more, the Zohar was much more problematic for Stanley in terms of being able to work with it, as opposed to dealing with some of the ideas that were being expressed. The ideas he found very compatible and very thought-provoking, but the actual material itself was much more difficult for him to work with than Sefer Yetzirah. And in fact, he came back to Sefer Yetzirah very strongly in the last part of his life in material that has not been published.
Yeah. So Sefer Yetzirah was right up his alley. And the fact that it had not been translated in any form that anybody could understand made it so obvious that it fit into his paradigm. So that it became obvious also that the structure of Sefer Yetzirah was the same structure as the Torah, and that they were kind of hand in hand. I'd like to share a little theory here based on that, and based on what I learned from Stan in regard to Sefer Yetzirah. It's called the Book of Formation, and nobody knows where it originated from. Theories go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, but a lot of it comes from Abraham. Started with Abraham. So what I did was I kind of thought about that, the story in the Torah that goes along, as mostly in Genesis, but also beyond, interwoven with some of Stan's ideas and how he actually used them. So if it starts, let's say it starts with Abraham, and let's go back to Stan's idea of Abraham as a mathematician, developing these ideas, discovering the one God. And the other thing that occurs in the Torah stories is the relationship with Egypt. Egypt keeps reoccurring, and we start, why is Egypt so important in the Torah? And maybe we could go into the translation of Mitzrayim and what that means. But Egypt was, Abraham goes to Egypt. Why? Why is Abraham in Egypt? We skip to Jacob. Jacob fights with the angel. And let's start with Abraham developing this what we'll call the Sefer Yetzirah, these ideas, this mathematics that Stan looked at Abraham as a mathematician. Then we go to Jacob. Jacob fights the angel, becomes Israel, and he weaves for his son Joseph a coat of many colors. Levana, I'm going to come back to you on that, on the coat of many colors. Then they go back to Egypt. Now they're in Egypt again. Joseph is the overseer. He's the dreamer. Okay, where do the dreams come from? So now the Sefer Yetzirah is now in Egypt, and the pharaoh that brought Joseph in is overthrown. That lineage is overthrown by the rulers that enslaved the Jews. Along comes Moses. Moses becomes a prince of Egypt and is privy to the inner teachings of the Egyptian priests. That Sefer Yetzirah still exists in Egypt. So under this theory, Moses is privy to the Sefer Yetzirah and studies it, learns it. Then what happens? He goes out in the desert for 40 years, comes back to Egypt, brings the people out, goes up to the mountain, receives the Torah. What does Kabbalah mean? To receive. So I think that so there's I believe that if you want to know the Torah and the structure and the math of the Torah, you need to know the Sefer Yetzirah. They're hand in hand. It's the same system. And there's only one person in the world who knew that, who developed that. And, yeah, he was really, he really wanted to spend years working on the Sefer Yetzirah. He kept talking about it. It's almost like I refer a lot to Beethoven. His last years were these string quartets that nobody understood, that he kept saying, this is for the future, this is not for the people today. And that's what Stan was working on. So, Daniel, you've talked about where the world needs to go and the direction things need to go. And I don't know, we need somebody who has that mind to come and take that, and develop that whole idea. Because right now, today, there's no direction in terms of scholarship and where we're going with that.
Yeah, it seems like everyone is like siphoned off in their little corners, and they're threatened by anyone who thinks differently with them. And I think Stan experienced a lot of that, and it was very surprising to him.
Yeah.
And so I think what he was hoping for, and I think this comes out in his work with the concepts of the minyan, of the group of people working together to achieve a state of consciousness where the emergent quality of God could kind of come through, was like that people, people start working together, like we need teams of people because it's too big. So we need someone to look at it mathematically. And I think one of the things that Stan did was he looked at it broader than with incredible ideas about mathematics and kind of this deep understanding of geometry and how it relates to Sefer Yetzirah. But he also, I think, was always hoping to get like a group of people to look at it from many different angles to kind of present like a unified front.
Right. That's
Right.
We're talking about universality, and that's what we were talking about last week. The universality of this. You have to get it on that level.
It's one of the things about Kabbalah, and especially the Zohar and all of it, but especially the Zohar, is that like if you go back, like there's a deep history of like rabbinic interpretation, and it really starts with Abraham when God says, "I'm going to just wipe out Sodom," and he says, "Well, hold on a second," and God says, "Oh." And then he like kind of bargains with him. Maybe there's just, maybe there's 10 people, don't destroy it. And God says, well, okay, the conversation's over. Okay. So then you fast forward to Moses, and now Moses has the Torah, and, the first act of the Jews is to like make an idol. And God says, well, I'm just going to wipe them out and start over with you. And Moses says, no, he really says, why are you so upset? And God says, oh, okay. We won't do that then. So there's this.
Can I make a clarification on that story?
Sure.
That didn't happen then. It was after the 12 spies came back, and they all wanted to return to Egypt. And I wrote a screenplay about it. That's why I know.
Oh, okay. Well, whatever the case,
it doesn't matter. Yeah.
We made a big mistake. And God wanted to, for sure. And God basically said, God asserted his authority. He says, I'm God, and I'm going to destroy them. And Moses said, he literally says, why are you so upset? Like literally, why? What's the problem? And he says, don't do that. We'll just, it's not going to look good. Don't do it. And God says, oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah.
So, like, that's the first rabbinic interpretation, where God says one thing, and then the interpreters say, like it's like the eye for an eye. God says an eye for an eye, and the rabbis say, "Oh, he didn't mean that."
Well, actually,
God
didn't say never mind. He says not one male who was born in Egypt will go into the promised land, and that's why you'll wander the
right. There are two stories. There's the Chet Egel, which is the sin of the golden calf, and then there's the spies. They're pretty different, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. There are two different stories, but the point being that there's a deep respect for for interpretation and non-literalism, and right in the Torah. And so, for example, probably most people would say, the Orthodox view of capital punishment is that we don't do that. We did away with capital punishment in Jewish jurisprudence 2,000 years ago almost, right? But so the literal interpretation is, of course, there's capital punishment, but the rabbinic interpretation was absolutely not. We don't do that. That's gross, right? And so the ancient enemy of the rabbinic movement in its early inception was literalism, and it's all over the Talmud that they couldn't stand each other, the literalists versus the rabbis. And so it's a funny turn of history that many people who consider themselves Orthodox are really literalists. And so, of course, those same groups can't stand the Kabbalah, because the Kabbalah says, forget the literalism, I mean, okay, do the best you can and do as many mitzvahs as you can, but let's look at what's going on here, and they're uncovered. And as a matter of fact, so that the enemies, so to speak, of the literalists can't stand the Kabbalah, right? And they say, you're wasting your time. It's wrong to learn it. But the Kabbalists, if you look, say very clearly, the only reason you came into the world is to learn Kabbalah, period. Forget the rest of the stuff. Was it Rabbi Natan, Rabbi Nachman's scribe, really? This is wild. I mean, this is really wild. He says the first compendium of Jewish law, the Mishnah, right? It is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the Kabbalah is the tree of life.
Interesting.
Interesting.
So like the whole concept of it as a system of law, like holy lawyers or something, is really it's. And then the Hasidim had to be careful, so they hid that. He says at one time in one place, it's one sentence, but he really does say that. And so it's what you find is, and I've seen this in books, old Hasidic books, where you're looking, and you're reading this thing, and you're going, this is the most mind-blowing thing I've ever seen in my life. So totally like beyond super age, as a friend of mine used to say, like beyond, like really far out. And then all of a sudden it cuts back to like, to do what you're told or else. And that was because there were censors. Like really, like it had to remain hidden after a certain time period. And so I don't know, the same kind of thing is going on now, but it seems to me that the time for people learning to work together, and for us learning, I mean, it sounds so simple, learning to work together, appreciating our own positive contributions and our positive qualities and our ability to contribute, and thereby appreciating others also, and not always like this strict judgment. It's either this or it's that. It's like there's a different mindset where we can learn to really appreciate each other. And I think that was one of the saddest things. It's just that, Stan so much appreciated pretty much everyone he ever met, but then all these people would just come in with these bizarre kind of judgmentalism. And this is from many different fields. This is not just a Jewish problem. This is a world problem.
Right. But, we have
sorry, I'm going off, but it's just...
it's okay,
anyway.
but we have to have a common language.
Yeah.
Right? Right, Adele? Yeah. We have to have a common language, and it's the hand gestures.
You're muted, Adele.
I'm muted because there was some interference in my room. The gestural language, I think, is such a huge contribution in the list of many aspects of his work. And I'm doing some new projects with it. Preparing some new courses. I'm choreographing a dance for young people that's using Shalom Rav and using the letters that spell Shalom. So this group meeting and talking has inspired me to just like get going already. And so I'm contributing a course to Embodied Jewish Wisdom Network, people who want to work in an embodied way. And that's what's so exciting, really, is that Kabbalah was about the body, right? It's like all of these points are on us, in us. And so the Sephirot aren't up there as an intellectual concept. They're in our arms and our legs and our hearts. So that's what I think the gestural language does.
You know, many people, when they read our book or whatever, see that, you know, they get intimidated by the idea of geometric, you know, interpretations or geometry itself. But really, when you think about it, geometry is the world we live in. Everything is geometry. This book is geometry, as are all of the post-its in it. My body exists in 3 dimensions, can be described geometrically, you know, and we get even closer and closer to that, by the way, when people wear bodysuits, you know, if you think about it, every single little point and movement, if you're going to make a movie out of it or whatever, it's digitally mapped into geometry. What you do, Adele, dance is geometry of the body, living geometry. You create shapes and shapes in motion. So it's not even just 3D, it's 4D. It's process, it's movement in
It's the
geometry.
pathways. Even the pathways we're walking are geometric as well, whether they're spirals or circles or lines intersecting. These are all geometric words.
So if you think of geometry as being where you live, the space you live in, then it becomes something that's not foreign at all. And you can start to open yourself to the kind of creative thought that anchors itself in geometry and then goes somewhere, that Adele is doing, or that Daniel's doing with sound, or that we all do just when we walk around in the world.
That's right.
Anyway, so that was my comment.
Well, geometry is also about relationships.
Yeah.
And how we relate to everything around us as humans, and even inanimate objects. Michael, we haven't given you an opportunity to weigh in on this, and I'm sure there is pearls of wisdom.
If I'm lucky. I had a few thoughts on, I was having fun listening along with the people watching the tape. First of all, the rabbis it wasn't like with the Zohar that everybody understood what was going on. They say that once the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, came along, and he died at a very young age, in his 30s, it was only then, by laying out the whole idea of God withdrawing from the world, the Tzimtzum and the sparks and the Big Bang and all of his analysis, that it was like that was the Hammurabi code that explained all the other stuff. You didn't understand it. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, now I get it, or could try and get it. And so it wasn't as if, remember that a lot of this stuff had to be kept secret, because it's like nuclear fission. You don't just give that to anybody, because you could get into a lot of trouble. And human beings, being what they are, they often do. And if they didn't think there was power in this, literal power, to be able to do like the miracles that you were referring to earlier, if those didn't happen, there was no reason to keep it secret. It was kept secret intentionally. I remember my martial arts teacher telling me that there were certain forms that when the Chinese would print up a little book, they would change the moves. They would leave a move out because they didn't want to take a chance somebody was going to do the right thing unless they heard it from a teacher. It was a different world. Today, the internet is kind of, in this case, I mean the internet. Everything's out there. Doesn't mean you understand it, but there's a tremendous amount of stuff out there. One of the things that popped into my head when Adele was speaking earlier, and how these things inspire in different ways and come out that way. The first thing in creation that we think of is God said, "Let there be light." And the Zohar says, what is light? Zu ahava, it's love. So with a very old book, way predating Christianity, this was the stuff that the religion was about. And if you take the three, watch how I tie this into Stan in a second. So just hang in there with me. Okay. If you take the root of the word for love, ahov, aleph, hey, bet. Okay. They say the first time a word is used in the Torah, that's its essential meaning. But they also say that the first time a letter is used as the key first letter of a prominent verb or a prominent statement, that's its deepest meaning. So when is, so the Torah starts with a bet, but that doesn't count. The first word is bara, is an active verb. Bereshit is with reshit. It's kind of an extra letter there telling you like a preposition. And you would say, okay, I get aleph, singularity. I get bet, multiplicity, a house. Now there's an inside and an outside. What is a hey? And so using that same logic, when is the word hey spelt out? When is it the first time it's used primarily? And it's not until well toward the end of the book of Genesis, not the chapter or the parsha of Genesis, but way at the end in Vayigash, where it says, I could be off on my nouns here, but it's something like Helahem Zerah, give them a seed. Okay, or give them seeds. When is that? It's when Joseph, having not yet revealed himself as one of the brothers, says to his servants, Helahem, which means give them seeds, which is kind of interesting in the whole seed that produces the fruit and so on, but I'll leave that for the moment. But if hey is give, the essential meaning of the letter hey is give, then you have something very interesting, because the letter before it in love is aleph, and the letter right after the hey is bet. We use the word love easily all the time. I love this, I love that. We don't really love fish. We love ourselves, and we therefore love fish that we can eat ourselves. It's a very singular, selfish kind of thing. It's not what we would consider unconditional love. Bet is the other. It's like aleph was, and there's all kinds of connections to the letter aleph and so on, representing God, divinity. When that letter appears, it says something divine is here. But when there's real love, it's when I'm not thinking about myself, I'm thinking about the other. So when it says love God with all your heart, soul, and might, it's saying we're an us, we're a we. When we love a human being, we love them because the aleph is giving itself over to be a bet. God is giving the world over to us and saying, I'm in you, I'm in your DNA, I'm here. And that's, it just, the whole thing flashed as Adele was speaking earlier, that the action that Beethoven takes in writing something for the future, a dance that not everybody's going to understand without a commentary. They'll feel something, but they may not understand it. But all of this is about healing the world. That's what the minyan is about. It's about healing the world. The world is a mess. It's exploded. And now we have to go and we have to find those sparks and release them into the world. And it releases in an infinite variety of things. I'm sorry if I'm sounding exceptionally esoteric here, but I just want to create the contrast with, but not that they're opposites. They're the same thing with all the geometry talk. You know, it's through the geometry. We're supposed to bring it down and spread it out and give it out, whether it's through music or dance or drama or meditation or whatever. It's to get it out there, and through the geometry. Go, Lavana.
Well,
I had forgotten about the spelling, of the Aleph Hey Bet.
Yeah.
Adele, think about the motion that you make with your hands with the gestures. You've got Aleph, Hey, Bet. Hey is a window, it's a connector. Bet, offering, giving, connecting in this way. Aleph, from yourself, connecting, Bet. And I can just picture, how you would move your whole body that way, but that's, it's like, that's not, anyway, that I just found that both very inspiring and absolutely an expression of the kinds of meanings to the letters that Stanley came up with. I mean, it works. And, I got a feeling from that, and I had forgotten about that spelling and what it would feel like to actually do it. So that was great.
So I think we've determined that the value of geometry is its universality, and its relationship to Kabbalah is pretty much what Stan brought us. If you are familiar with Kabbalah, or somebody is, I guarantee if you bring this up, they will deny any knowledge or any relationship to geometry, because, as Stan put it many times, nobody knows about this. And we're hoping that by having a program like this, and through other videos that Stan has done over the years, it starts to pick up, wow, maybe there's something to this. Because if you're going to talk about universality, how can you deny mathematics in terms of its non-cultural, non-prejudicial, aspect? And we've talked about that a lot. So thank you very much for joining us. We will be back next time, and take care. Bye-bye.